Now, the arrest of a former cabinet minister, several government officials across provinces, and efforts to get back millions stolen during the state capture has given hope to South Africans who have doubted whether anyone would ever be held accountable or go to jail or even pay back the monies stolen from the state coffers during the period Jacob Zuma was allowed to, of course, run roughshod over institutions and allowed the Guptas essentially to call the shots. Well, to discuss with me how the criminal justice system, in particular the National Prosecuting Authority and the Asset Forfeiture Unit, is going to be dealing with it, I'm joined by its former head, Mr. Willie Hofmeyr. Mr. Hofmeyr, you have now stepped down from your post, but you've spent, several decades with the National Prosecuting Authority. Let's first talk about, the question of the money. We saw in the Daily Maverick that the Asset Forfeiture Unit, and I'm not sure if it was your last gift to the institution before you left, essentially have managed to get their hands on quite a bit of money, particularly those belonging to regiment's capital. First, tell us, what exactly does it mean when the assets are frozen? Does it mean the state has now taken possession of it? And more importantly, what is the ballpark figure we're talking about?
Well, let me start with the ballpark figure. I think we were asked a parliamentary question a couple of months ago when I was still at the AFU about the value of cases that we were working on, and that value was about 30 billion rand. So that's not to say there are not many more cases out there, but those are cases that have been or are being investigated by the police or the Hawks, and we're working with them in terms of recovering the assets. So there is a huge amount to be recovered, but I think the issues that I wish to highlight is just that we're dealing with incredibly sophisticated money laundering and other mechanisms. So investigating and unbundling the money flows that have happened and proving where it came from, where it went to, who were the people involved, does take some very detailed and intensive investigative work. And as the NPA, we do now have the investigating directorate that has investigating powers. But traditionally, we've been very much had to rely only on the Hawks or the police to do the criminal investigations and get the evidence that we have. So I think there's a huge amount of work being done, but yes, we must just have moderate our expectations on how fast it can be done, given the capacity that we have in the state to process.
But the investigative directorate has been given extra sets of hands, particularly senior counsel to assist. I know that the Hawks has been hollowed out, but I spoke with General Lebeya last week on this very show about him getting capacity. What about the Asset Forfeiture Unit? Do you actually have accountants, forensic investigators that can go methodically through evidence to tell you exactly where this money has been going? Because presumably every state must have the capacity to deal with money launderers in a global environment, in an environment of artificial intelligence, and of course where people leave a paperless trail. How equipped is the Asset Forfeiture Unit to actually do their jobs?
We're fairly equipped. But just to reiterate the issue that, we are not the people who have powers to do the investigation, or Asset Forfeiture doesn't have those powers. So we very much depend on working with those who have the powers, the Hawks, the investigating directorate,
but the Hawks is fairly weak, Mr. Hofmeyr. So where does that leave you?
I think in the latest budgets, the Asset Forfeiture and the NPA got considerable amounts of additional budget. So there is space for us or for the NPA to build the capacity now. But being the state, we go through a lengthy recruitment process, so that probably will take 3, 4, 5 months before we start seeing real results, given that the Christmas period is coming up. But I do have a lot of hope, just in the sense that there is now, for the first time in 3 years, some extra money to bring in extra capacity.
Now, according to the Daily Maverick, it says a devastatingly comprehensive order handed down in chambers in the High Court in Johannesburg on Monday provided for all the assets linked to regiments, its remaining 2 directors, Niven Pillay and Lita Nonyane, and their former partner Eric Wood, as well as those held by respective family trusts, by their lawyers or third parties, to be surrendered to a court-appointed curator. So what exactly does that mean? Do you now hold those assets, or are they frozen in banks? Do these people have access to that money?
It's obviously not me anymore, but in terms of the NPA, we've got, maybe I should just explain, we've got 2 kinds of asset forfeiture that our law provides for. So the one is when somebody is criminally charged, and let's say we can prove that they benefited from about R1 billion, which I think is the case in that matter. What we can then go to court, ask the court to appoint a curator, which is an independent outside
Has that happened
person.
in the regiment's case?
Yeah. So the curator essentially will has the power to freeze the assets, has the obligation to look after them until the criminal trial is finalized. And it's only at the end of the criminal trial that the court can then say, okay, the state has now proved in your criminal case that you benefited, let's say, from R1 billion. We can now recover that R1 billion from any property that you own.
Yeah.
We don't have to find the actual R1 billion.
Yeah.
But also importantly, in many cases, we find people have given the money away to others, whether it's a family trust or children or business partners. And to the extent that we can track that, we can then recover the same. If somebody had received R10 million out of that money, we can go and recover the R10 million from any clean assets that they have. We don't have to find the actual R10 million. So in a sense, it works very much like a normal civil judgment.
Yeah. Now, one of the things, of course, is that you need the cooperation of other countries, because these are transnational operations. December 9th is World Anti-Corruption Day, and we've seen with Lord Hayne's testimony massive institutions that operate globally, like HSBC, like McKinsey, like Bain and KPMG and SAP and others, where the monies have gone. The Mail and Guard, or rather the Daily Maverick, has said that we have a treaty with the United Arab Emirates, but apparently there's now some problems with the translation of this treaty into English, and there isn't quite clarity on whether these people can be extradited. Now, we all know people like Salim Issa and others are hiding out in these countries. What exactly happened there? Mr. Michael Masuta, the Justice Minister, negotiated this treaty. Why is there confusion over this treaty?
I mean, that's more issues in the domain of the Justice Department, so I don't particularly want to comment on that.
But just in terms of how it impacts you tracking money, you meeting with your counterparts in, let's say, Hong Kong or other countries in banks, which is, of course, an operational matter. That's not a political matter. How does the lack of a solid treaty impact your ability to recover these monies?
That is part of what led to a lot of the delays over the last few years. But, you know, I think part of the structural problem at the moment is that our law that I was helped passing in Parliament many years ago does provide that we can make what's called central authority to central authority requests for mutual legal assistance, which is much more speedy than the traditional process, which was to send it through what's called the diplomatic channel. So that means our request goes to Justice, which is the central authority. They send it to Foreign Affairs, or TERCO as it's called these days. There it may sit or may be passed on, and it may take a very long time. And particularly when politics was compromised, I think so things got stuck for a long time there. So, you know, I think what I want to plead for, and that we've been pushing for, is to make use of the powers of the law, which is that our central authority, the Department of Justice, can make requests directly to central authorities in other countries and cut out the sort of delays that occur with ambassadors and other people not knowing what they're dealing with, sitting with the documentation.
Now, given the fact that in terms of the story, the legal agreement with the United Arab Emirates is actually not sound. Does it require Mr. Ronald Lamola, the Justice Minister currently, to renegotiate this treaty? And will that then enable you to go and track those individuals, but more importantly also extradite them to come and answer whether it is civil or criminal proceedings that might, be developing here in South Africa?
I think certainly it would help if the process can be shortened. But, on the treaty itself, I don't really want to comment on it. I've not seen it in detail. I have not actually seen the extradition requests in detail.
But if it's faulty, let's say, for example, the treaty was negotiated as the story suggests. The United Arab Emirates says they don't actually quite understand what they have signed because they have a problem with the language, which one finds extremely hard to understand because these are international countries. One would assume that these things are done. But let's say it's not done and the treaty doesn't hold. How does it put you back? And what does it require from the Justice Department and the Justice Minister to actually do?
I think that obviously leads to great delays, and what does need to be done is to address the problems if there are valid problems there. But as far as I understand, UAE is also part of the United Nations Convention Against Corruption.
So they
have international obligations to fulfill here.
Yeah.
But, the problem is it is essentially political pressure that has to be brought, and it can be more or less effective. But, part of the problem is it's out of the hands of law enforcement at this stage. It really is.
So it rests with the politicians.
Yeah.
Okay. So say, for example, this matter isn't sorted out by Mr. Lamola anytime soon. Does it mean the investigators that you used to oversee or whoever's going to be taking over from you can't go to the United Arab Emirates, can't engage with the financial institutions there, can't actually do the forensic detective work that is required?
I think that's correct to the extent that South Africa is not getting the actual documents that you need to analyze and to find the money flows and so on. I do think, just going back a bit earlier to your questions about other states, both the United States and United Kingdom have very powerful international anti-corruption laws. And they've given themselves jurisdiction over any transaction that involves a banking institution that does business in their jurisdiction.
Yeah, the United States is one, for example.
And Britain as well. So they do have some capacity to put pressure on those institutions as well. So, I'm fairly confident, but I can't say we are sure that, eventually we will get the material as South Africa. But it is incredibly frustrating when it gets stuck in these delays, and it's very difficult to find out what the reason for the delays are.
I want to ask you specifically about International Anti-Corruption Day, which of course is the 9th of December. How important is it for states to cooperate, and more importantly for citizens across countries and borders to actually stand together against corruption, and how can they assist agencies such as the Asset Forfeiture Unit, such as the Hawk, such as the NPA, to bring to book these large-scale money laundering that is obviously not unique to South Africa. We see it as a phenomenon in other countries as well.
No, it is vital, and I think as the United Nations Convention Against Corruption that I mentioned earlier is a critical tool where states committed to cooperate.
The question is compliance.
The question is, you can comply, but take a very long time to comply sometimes. So, those are the practical problems with states that are not always fully committed to cooperate for whatever reason.
All right, Mr. Hofmeyr, thank you so very much for your time. And of course, also, we're not quite sure what you're going to do next, but I'm sure you are going to be popping up perhaps somewhere else in the public service. Thank you so much for joining me on The Fix. Next up, we take a look at the stories making headlines in the weekend newspapers. Stay tuned.